Okay, thank you everybody for joining us here today for our second annual Artificial Intelligence program. We have a lot in store, a lot to go over, and if you've been paying attention to the news last week, there's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. So what I'd like to do is we could just get started. We're going to have a conversation to begin the day like we did last year. I thought it went very well last year, and this is going to lay the foundation for, in my mind, kind of dispel the myths, talk about what's facts, talk about what really is going on today with respect to artificial intelligence. So it's an open-ended discussion of the legal and technical landscape that exists today. So let me introduce our panelists. And I will start from the audience's left to right. So to begin, we have Creighton Frommer, and Creighton is Chief Intellectual Property Counsel for RELX, and which is the parent company of LexisNexis, among other companies. He's been working for RELX for over 16 years, and he's a technologist and an attorney and a geek like all the rest of us, and he's also agreed to help me kind of keep this conversation going and co-moderate. So thank you, Creighton. I appreciate that. And next to Creighton, in the center of the stage, we have Jason Allen Snyder, and Jason is a good friend of mine. I've known Jason for a number of years. When we started doing these AI programs, I was thrilled that he was willing to come and speak. He's Global Chief Technology Officer from Momentum Worldwide, and he is his bio says he's a futurist, a technologist, an inventor, an author, and a lecturer. He's really a Renaissance man. But one of the top accolades to explain who Jason is he's been recognized by Metaverse Insider, which is a publication, as being one of the top 30 experts in the world. So I'm just happy to have you here, Jason, for all those reasons, and because you're my friend and I really like seeing you. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Chief.
And last but not least, we have Malik Ben Salam, and Malik is the Managing Director of Data and AI at Accenture Security, and she is focused on security for emerging technologies, including quantum, blockchain, AI, and the metaverse. And I'm glad you joined us too. I didn't have to do too much convincing, although I think she was wondering, well, what do I have to offer for a legal conference? And I mean, I personally, as a technologist myself, I don't think we can really understand and talk about AI without really understanding what is true, what is fact, what is fiction. So let's start there if we can. And let me ask you, Creighton, and I'll ask Jason and Malik the same question. What do you want the audience to focus on, big picture, as we start the conversation today?
Yeah, big picture, I think one of the main issues is people kind of believing that AI is sort of a one-size-fits-all solution, and that we should solve it from a legal perspective and take that from a one-size-fits-all solution. So, AI is a tool, and we all know this. Whether it's a large language model, you're using it for predictive purposes, it's machine learning, but it's the use case that matters. And I've seen other attorneys who maybe don't have a technology focus who try to say, well, let's just have a policy. We need an AI policy. Well, that's not really going to cut it. You've got to think about how you're using AI, how it applies to the data, and again, just making sure that it's, you're applying the tool properly.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Next, let's go to Jason. Jason, if you could give us your preliminary thoughts, that would be great.
Sure. So a year ago, I was on this stage and we were talking about inventorship in AI. So should AI have the ability to be an inventor? Does it have that ability, or is it a tool? What does that mean? And I was speaking with some of the folks here that I met last year, and sort of what's transpired in the last year for me is that I now spend a lot less of my time as a technologist and a futurist, and a lot more of my time with attorneys, and trying to navigate the meaning of all of the things that Creighton was trying to unpack. What how does this black box work? How many black boxes are involved? What are the privacy implications of it? What are the ethical implications of it? And sort of what it is today, and controversially maybe it's a collection of different morph engines. It really doesn't do a whole lot more than that. It certainly doesn't have agency, and it's certainly not going to take over the world tomorrow. But the reality is like, how do we unpack this? And I think again, in the short term, the thing to maybe focus on is explainable AI and what the implications of explainable AI are. And certainly as a practitioner, as a developer, that means you're going to sacrifice performance and other things, but it certainly is going to help from a legal perspective.
So I'm going to come back to that. Your answer was shocking to me when you said it's not going to take over the world tomorrow, because that kind of implies that maybe it could take over the world eventually.
No doubt.
Yeah. And that's the scary thing that I think a lot of us are starting to wonder about more and more so than certainly we were last year, and certainly any time during our lifetimes, I think. But we'll come back to that more. So Malik, let's move over to you and get your preliminary thoughts.
So I think for a legal audience, the two main.
Hold on. Is the microphone on? Oh, there we go.
Sorry. For the legal audience, I think the two main ways of looking at it is understanding risks that come with AI, whether it's IP risks, compliance risks, privacy risks, but also on the other hand, thinking about how AI can be used within the legal discipline, right? How, are there uses for it? How can we leverage this technology to assist lawyers in the work that they're doing?
Okay, great. So thank you very much for that. So let's go back and maybe to the beginning here, I think, because Jason, you've got a video that you wanted us to take a look at.
Sure.
So let me cue that up.
Yeah, so I brought something along today that's an example of some of the work that we do. This is some work we did for Coca-Cola, and this is how we combined multiple types of generative AI together to solve a business problem for them. And this is the type of things when I talk about what we're doing with counsel is how we navigate executing things like this.
This is the AI-powered Coke Studio. It uses artificial intelligence to turn people's rockstar fantasies into reality. At music festivals around the world.
This is so much fun.
It made me feel like I was a real rock star.
It was exactly what we love to dance to.
But that's not the interesting part, because to create that reality, we asked fans to answer fun questions and turn their answers into fun prompts, and fed those prompts into ChatGPT to create their band name, and into Loudly to create their first music single. Then, the studio fed all of that into Stable Diffusion to create their album art, which got fed into a video game engine, which turned our recording studio into their band's first music video. All fully automated in minutes. And music fans really loved that.
I had the best time dancing with my friends. Absolutely amazing.
The visuals are incredible.
It was super fun.
But that's still not the interesting part, because we also had to make sure we were not stealing from real artists or real musicians. They don't like that. So we only trained our engines with music we licensed. Then we used smart prompting and trained our AI with oversight to make sure that our fans created original band names, original art, and original music. So we didn't just create an amazing live AI experience, we created a new AI methodology for Coca-Cola North America that will safeguard artwork and music everywhere, and artists, and musicians, and AI engines love that. And that is the interesting part.
Okay.
I think you just made the IP community very happy with that.
Yeah,
That was cool.
yeah, and we'll spend some time talking about that, and maybe before we go too deeply into that bit about protecting IP, Jason, you want to explain what it is that we saw? Is that something you worked on for Coca-Cola?
Yeah, that's right. So in my remit, I work in experiential marketing inside the Interpublic Group. I'm the global chief technology officer that leads that. So that's a lot of physical computing work. So for Coca-Cola, for example, those are all different music festivals, and we built that two-story structure and designed that two-story structure and kitted it out with all the technology inside of it. And to be honest with you, that wasn't really the hard part. The hard part wasn't combining all of these different technologies to output these original pieces. It's protecting the intellectual property around all of the information these models were trained on, and ensuring safety for the brand, that nothing would be infringed upon on the final output. And really was months and months and months of navigation through outside counsel, their internal counsel, the counsel inside of my company, Interpublic Group, and in sort of navigating all of that. And that's really where the complexity comes in. So you have to have a profound technical understanding of how all this stuff works to unpack it in a way that it can be useful and actually applicable and live in the real world from a legal perspective.
Great. So, Creighton, you want to jump in there? I mean, you have some thoughts on protecting IP. I know. I mean, maybe you could start by sharing your perspective on AI and IP and that sort of thing. I think I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. And disclaimer, my comments here are my own, not my company's necessarily. But we do come from Relics as a company that both is a publisher and is a user of AI, and so we need to balance the ability to use content from third parties that's properly licensed, like you're doing, and also the protections of the content that we've created over the years that we don't want to necessarily go into anybody's AI. And so there is a fine line of working and making sure that the content's licensed in a proper way, and then there's a concept people talk about, like some sort of mandatory license scheme. But that doesn't necessarily work out because you've got people, especially if it's a reputational aspect issue or a content where people don't want their content to be used. If you get a license for a movie or a film, you have to actually get that license. You can't, and request it commercially, you can't get a mandatory license for that purpose. Just the same thing with AI. We have our Elsevier company, which has published scientific journals since the 1800s. We want to be able to control that. We don't want to have to respond to some sort of mandatory license to have that good content. And I think in the New York Times case, just in the last couple weeks, they presented the argument around their news is it's not just a copyright issue, it's a reputational issue. And it's a unique and a good argument to help people understand that there is something more than just copying and using it in training, but especially when you're looking at content that relates to authenticity. In a music scenario or an entertainment scenario, authenticity maybe is not as required. It's more about connection and reputation of the artist, and artist integrity. But there may be two things of the same coin. You want to be able to control that access, not just from a copying perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and that's very important. We're going to talk a lot about that throughout this whole program. But Malik, I want to bring you in here now, and we're going to loop back and talk about a lot of these things. I have one more question, and I'll turn it over to you, Creighton. I know you've got some questions for the group as well. But one of the things that we talked about a bit was this idea of hallucinations, which is a real problem for a whole host of reasons. Can you just, in a nutshell, explain what do we mean when we talk about hallucinations, and what is the problem as you see it?
Hallucinations are one of the major risks of generative AI and large language models. What they mean is this tendency of a large language model to come up with output that is unreliable, that is not authentic, that is not true. And so that creates, obviously, risks, especially in use cases where the end user trusts the AI a system to answer their questions. So it's a big problem everywhere. It's also a big problem within the legal sector, for sure. You probably are familiar with that case last year where a lawyer from New York consulted with ChatGPT to, come up with their, to write basically their a case, and the the legal work cited was completely generated, right, fabricated. So that creates obviously a huge risk. I've seen a study done by Stanford University, 2 of the labs in Stanford University, that looked at all of the existing large language models and how much hallucinations they're vulnerable to or they tend to generate. And it turns out that, again, within the legal sector, 75% of the output is just pure hallucinations. So, while in other, sectors or domains, LLMs tend to do better, I think we need to further work on them and fine-tune them specifically with legal information in order to improve the accuracy and the reliability of their output when it comes to legal issues.
Okay, great, thanks. And Creighton, I'll kick it over to you and let you inquire of the panel.
Yeah, and just before I do that, I think you make an excellent point, and we found that in our testing with like Lexis Plus AI, how much hallucination these large language models really want to find the right answer. And whether or not that's the correct answer or what it's plausible or what thinks is plausible is very hard. And so, yeah, we've implemented like retrieval augmented generation where it'll double check citations and things like that and found good results. But it does you need to find an LLM that's not just trained but also tuned in your field and presents promising guardrails, to make sure.
And it's not just the tuning, it's the way the technology is organized. So it's bifurcating information in a way so that it's not going out to the large models. It's using other architectures, like you can use a small language model that's trained. So there's sacrifices that you're going to make from a technology perspective using these different sorts of approaches. However, the reality is that we can reduce hallucination overall depending on the architecture and the methodology that you use to organize the information that's being ingested and returned.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Well, one question I have is, I feel like we've kind of passed the Turing test, I think, in the last couple of years, how useful that may be. But people don't even really talk about that anymore. But are there things that you think we should be talking about, especially as lawyers, about the power of AI that keep you up at night, or just you think that we're missing kind of a blind spot?
As lawyers, I don't know. I think dealing with all of these risks, finding ways of dealing with and reducing these risks, the question of copyright, obviously, that's a big issue that needs to be resolved, and I think that's hindering to a certain extent innovation and the broader use of AI. But on a technical side, I think the question of privacy risk, right, and how can we come up with ways of being able to query and interact with these with Gen AI without having the risk of private data or sensitive data being leaked. So that's something that keeps me up as a technologist, not as a
when I saw even
lawyer.
I think it was OpenAI's tool a few weeks ago where somebody was asked to just repeat the same word over and over and over again, and eventually it then started spitting out trade secret information, confidential information.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was a completely, to me, surprising technical solution or technical hack to get it to do that. Is there any way we can prevent these kinds of things, or are we just going to have to kind of live with people finding ways to hack it?
I think we're going to, that limitation, it's called a divergence attack, by the way. So you keep interacting with the AI until it just loses the context and has to completely switch to another context and starts generating information. And by way of doing that, it runs the risk of leaking sensitive information. Obviously there are memory limitations, right? As you're interacting with the AI, at some point you're going to hit that memory limit, and then it will lose track of the context because it hit that memory limit. So you can increase the memory limit, but no matter what, at some point you're going to hit it. So I think you're always going to find a way to attack the AI.
Yeah, and from a securities perspective, at least from my point of view, I guess maybe you can use AI to help prevent other AI issues. Do you think that's helpful? I mean, it's going to be hard to figure out all the permutations of ways that people are going to be able to attack.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful. So for me and my team, we are using large language models to red team or test other large language models. But it's not a bulletproof approach, right? It helps significantly, but, again, hackers will always find a way to attack.
Yeah. And Jason?
I'll tell a story. It's a salacious one, so Gene will be excited. I don't know how many are familiar with this, but last year OpenAI was doing some laboratory work, and they were testing the system. And what they were doing was trying to have the system read a CAPTCHA, so those things that prove that you're not a robot, right, when you have to type that stuff in. And again, I don't know how much of this is true, like in the context of, I know this really happened, but we don't really understand how it really happened, but it was documented and published in their report. So the model was trying to sort this out, and it decided that it would get a TaskRabbit, one of those people that you hire to do things, and it told the TaskRabbit that it was visually impaired. It was a person who was visually impaired, because the TaskRabbit, the person actually asked, well, you're not a robot, right? LOL. Right, and it's like, no, not at all. I'm a person who's visually impaired, so you need to do this CAPTCHA thing for me. So, like in the context of what stuff that keeps you up at night, right? That you should be concerned about. That's the kind of stuff that you should be concerned about. Because it does this today.
Those
right?
connections of the real world.
That's correct.
APIs and things like that.
That's correct.
And it seems to be the mode of where we're going.
Yeah.
More of those types of things.
Yeah, and it's not about again. It all falls into these ethical boundaries. But for ChatGPT, again, it's just pattern recognition. That's all it's do. That's all they do. That's all it does, right? It's just looking at patterns, and that pattern makes the most sense in order to solve the problem for the platform. But what guardrails are you going to make sure are enforced when you deploy these technologies? And having kind of a deep technical understanding of what those guardrails could be, even the possibilities of them, that's very important.
I think that kind of leads into one concern I have. Ask me what are the issues. Like, one of our responsible AI principles is to always have human oversight and accountability in how an AI reacts and acts. But if you look maybe 5 years, maybe less, down the road, AI is going to become so ubiquitous in tools that we use and things that we do. Are we going to be able to keep that level of oversight? Or are humans always going to be able to stay in the loop? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, our technology has surpassed our morality and our legislation a long time ago, right? That's like that's the world we live in now. I think, as I was saying, kind of at the top of the conversation, explainable AI, or XAI, as it's sort of the shorthand for it, I think is really the only way forward if things are going to be deployed in environments that are mission critical, where truth matters, where veracity matters, where lives are can be impacted in real time, and so that just simply means that there is a transparent way of dialing back and understanding how these platforms are working. That in the very, very large, complex neural network models, those are black boxes, and they're oftentimes very narrow in what they're able to do. And as Malik said, we used to spend a lot of time talking about deep learning, and now really there's a focus on long learning, because once you run out of those tokens and it loses context, the whole thing kind of falls apart. And so these are the two big areas that I think I'd be focused on, is this sort of explainable AI and understanding kind of how many tokens you have before you run out of quarters to put in the machine.
Malik, do you have any thoughts on that?
So I think that's where we're going. However, I hope that we still have humans in the loop. It's hard to resist, I know, with big companies making so many gains from productivity gains, et cetera. It's hard to justify keeping people in the loop. But it's just a hope. I hope we do, because I don't completely trust the AI. Being one who works in cybersecurity, I know there's always a way to circumvent the safety guardrails. And so without a human overseeing eventually what the AI is doing, especially for high-stake decisions, it's hard for me to justify completely automated systems. But we will not get there if we don't have, the right AI regulations. If we keep it, to me, if we keep it to businesses, I think, what we'll see is totally automated systems without AI oversight.
Yeah, but I think the Coke is a good example where I agree that there does need to be regulation, but there can be some self-regulation, I think, on some aspects of protecting intellectual property and things like that. But then you also do see pushback and bias and diversity and inclusion restrictions and things like that. So it's going to be a lot of push and pull, both politically and in the corporate world.
And today it has a lot to do with the prompt engineering. It's not about asking the generative AI to do things. It's about telling it what not to do and making sure that that's bulletproof, like inside of, if you're going to deploy it, if it falls within the safety guidelines and the privacy guidelines, have the prompts been engineered in such a way that the system understands what it shouldn't do explicitly.
One question I've had come up, and maybe you could kind of help explain if people understand, is we go back to the training side of things. X company says, well, we've got content that your large language model is trained on. Take it out. We don't want it there anymore. We didn't give you a license. Take it out. Can you explain why that doesn't work, or how that could work? Is there a way?
Yeah, I mean, technically it could work, but from a business sense, it doesn't work, because what that means is that you'll have to retrain, the model that you've created you've been working on over years, right? And using, tens of thousands of GPUs to train for 2 or 3 years. So from a business sense, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Technically, it could work, but you'll have to start from scratch.
Yeah, it becomes like a multi-million-dollar project.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or more, depending on how big the model is.
Yeah. When you watch your GPUs, how much they cost.
Yeah.
So is the proper solution that guardrails then that prevent the content from being released?
I mean, I think that's one solution, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's for me, it's about transparency. Putting those models in place that will be conformed to kind of whatever regulatory concerns are going to be required. But the thing is that most of these LLMs are built to super serve. They're meant to serve everyone, so that and it's building a stack on top of it, using things like smaller language models, using other ways to query that information, making sure that you ring fence what's happening on the outside. It's never going out and providing answers and responses that you aren't checking either with a human being or with a model that you've trained yourself that you do trust. So I think that it's about the future, or the kind of near-term future, of what is the generative AI stack, and what does that look like, and what does that look like in the context of whatever business problem you're trying to solve for a business.
I want to also point out that there are some emerging research techniques to let these deep learning networks unlearn stuff by updating the weights and biases of the neurons within the network. But they're still under research, so it's not something that we can apply today when a company makes a request for their data not to be used. It's more, like surgical interventions if you want somebody's specific document or data to be removed or unlearned. But it's not that scalable, so it will require more research.
And the broader impact of those on the larger systems isn't understood yet.
Yeah.
That's the other real big issue. So when you remove that one piece, what happens to the rest of the Jenga? Does it all fall down?
One of the other issues that comes up a lot is disclosure of AI. And at least the way I see it is, it goes back to what we've talked about, is it an AI tool that you're using for authentic data, or is it one more for entertainment purposes? I have a colleague who works in an entertainment company and says, you don't want to be watching Top Gun and then have a flag come up on the screen that says AI. It's going to take you out of the image and out of the picture. But if you're using it for legal research or scientific research, you do want to know if you're talking with an AI and if that content is coming through a human in the loop, or if it's just coming directly from an AI.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts on that, Malik?
From a technology perspective?
Yeah, from a technology perspective, how do we think about disclosure? When is disclosure appropriate in your mind?
I mean, To me, I think it's use case, as you mentioned, use case dependent. The one use case I worry about is, obviously the impact of the use of Gen AI to generate misinformation or disinformation, especially, obviously in the election year. So in those cases, obviously, you don't want the generated content to say that this has been generated by AI to ensure the authenticity. I think for most cases you do want that, and you want that to be traceable and verifiable, either through a watermarking technique, or not sure what kinds of techniques that are that we
It's
can
easier said than done.
enforce. Yeah, sorry.
It's easier said
It's
than
easier,
done
yeah, exactly.
to keep that
Exactly.
chain of
Yeah.
disclosure.
And that's the challenge. So I'm looking at it from a technology perspective. There are some challenges that have to be resolved in order to be able to keep that watermarking chain.
Mm-hmm. I have a slightly different point of view. I think that you should be able to contextually reveal if AI is used in something, anything, whether it's the new Top Gun movie or not. We're all okay with putting ingredients on the food boxes that we eat when we go to the store, and we know what's inside of them, and where they're sourced from. And I think when you're generating content, a very similar kind of methodology should apply. And even if it's unexplainable as to kind of how the black box works, knowing that there was one involved, I think is very, very important.
Thanks. And for a few years from now, we may be sitting down here next year. We kind of, from last year, the train left the station about this time last year. I think we're still on the tracks, but I'm not sure we know the destination yet. Do you have any ideas of what kind of topics we might be thinking about next year?
The one that worries me most really is the impact of AI on jobs, and the jobs that we're going to be losing over next year. I think that's the bigger issue we will be discussing. So yeah. All legal and technology discussions basically dwarf in front of that, I think.
I think we're going to be talking about quantum next year, and the impact quantum's having on AI, and the ability for these two technologies to work together to gain greater efficiencies, gain greater speed of return, and generally provide better combinatorial innovation across all the different types of machine learning and AI.
Yeah, and from the legal perspective, I would like to think we're going to have some more insights on the copyright issues, but I don't think we will. I think it's still going to have to be played out. Between Congress probably not acting in an election year, the Supreme Court in the U.S. with other things to do. We do have the EU AI Act that's passed and given us some clarity in Europe, but I'm not sure that approach is necessarily one that we're going to see in the United States be as successful from a regulatory perspective. Can we take questions from the
Yeah, sure. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get to that. Do we have any questions there?
Any questions? We have
go ahead.
one.
From whose perspective do you think explainable is going to be measured?
So the question is, from whose perspective do we think explainability will be measured?
For me in the work that I do, the answer is going to be the attorney, right, involved, right? So it's going to be whatever counsel is representing both parties that's going to demand a level of transparency based on the impact to that business and what it means to that client, and the risk. It's just risk management in that case.
So I have a question about the hallucination issue, because I think that that's a gigantic issue for a number of reasons. It goes beyond. We'll talk about it from an legal ethics standpoint later on in the program on Wednesday. But it seems to me that AI is very good at finding an answer. It is programmed to give you an answer, right? So it's good at finding an answer, a lot less good about verifying whether that answer is actually correct or even what you actually asked it for. And so that's, I think, a gigantic problem. It's not reliable enough yet. And I think when I say maybe we should take a step back and we should talk about the different flavors of AI and machine learning and generative AI. And I think I'd like to get your take on this. Is that the Microsoft is not the Google model, and and different people have different tools and different levels of sophistication and different training, and so we talk about it. A lot of us, I do, as a collective it, but it's not really a collective it, is it? Maybe we can start there.
No, it's not. It's not. It's a very siloed bunch of its, kind of today. But I would think, my point of view around this is that we, in the very old days, we used to say the problem exists between the keyboard and the chair, right? Mm-hmm. The issue is the questions that are being asked and how they're being asked. So there are limitations to these models. People don't understand what they are. You have to figure that out for yourself. But if you are asking it a question or wanting to get information and you're getting the wrong answer, then you might be asking the wrong question. And there might be another way to solve that problem. And I don't think that the world has enough experience yet with these systems to understand that maybe I have to go back and rethink how I'm going to get to this outcome. And that's like a new skill, right? That inside of prompt engineering that people have to develop.
So, and right before we started, you and I were talking about the problems with the Gemini, and Copilot's had some issues over the last week too. Not, I don't think, nearly the level that Google's Gemini has had. And the one that we were talking about was asking for a picture. And a lot of you probably have seen this. If you haven't, it's all over the last few days. Asking for a picture of George Washington, and it returned a picture of somebody dressed like George Washington, but he was an African-American gentleman. Mm-hmm. And that was just, one thing that was clearly, obviously wrong. But how does that happen? And can you share with the audience what you told me? Sure. About it? What is, it's not really good for that.
Right. I mean, that's it. If you're asking a model that's not trained to understand images, visual images, then it's going to return its best possible result in the context of its training. There are other models that are trained explicitly on producing images, and the thing is that the models don't really talk to each other very well today, if at all, because there is not one. Right? There is not one AI to rule them all yet. But kind of further to that point, like I hope everyone's familiar with the notion of like ASCII text, right? You used to be able on a keyboard, like at a computer screen, you could write like big bubble letters if you type in the right thing and it comes out right. If you ask ChatGPT, for example, or Bard to give you your name in ASCII text, like in this, it generally can't do it. But if you asked it to write you a JavaScript that would allow you to output ASCII text of those characters, it'll be able to do that, right? And that's the type of thing that I'm referring to.
So it's good at certain things and not very good at other things.
It's terrible at other things. Yeah. Yes.
And that's one of the places I wanted to go with this hallucination. And Malik, if you have any thoughts, what I have heard, and I think we've all talked about this in the pre-call, is that now these AI models are starting to learn in some contexts based on their own output as part of the training data. They're really kind of falling apart at the moment. Can you explain what's going on there?
Yeah, so we're starting to see that, but we're going to see more of that in the future as more of their output is generated and is out there on the internet. So if today we can't get these models to generate authentic, reliable output based on what we as humans have put out there, imagine in the future when all of the information that they're consuming is completely fabricated, right? So we're going to see truth decay, if you will, as in future generations of these LLMs and Gen AI models.
So, and I know we spend some time talking about like trying to get the data out, like from an IP perspective, but it strikes me that I almost don't even know how to ask these questions. It's evolving so fast, right? But if it's learning based on garbage, its own garbage, then how do you fix that? How do you get that out? How is like the next wave of necessary technologies for AI in order to achieve its true promise does that need to be some kind of innovations that allow you to go in and extract or under the hood and tweak? I almost think of myself, like you run these programs on your computer periodically to free up space and to check and to clean and to fix things that are going on behind the scenes. Is that what we're going to need to see happen to AI?
I mean, I cited earlier some research that is doing that to, making models unlearn what they've learned, but again, it's very limited in its capabilities. I think, that's another reason why we need to watermark AI-generated content, so that whether you can consume it again, you can feed it again to the AI models, or better not.
Right.
I think we also need to start creating an ability to identify veracity of information and what is within a corpus of data that we know to be true. And I think that's, in my opinion, like kind of when we talk about what's going to happen next, I believe there'll become a marketplace for that, because there are all these existing assets that in the world, in almost every business, which is these large pools of data. And the data decays very, very quickly over time, but that data may be accurate or correct or true. And we need to regard it in such a way so that we can understand and know the difference between new things that are being generated and make those comparisons.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that really continues to catch me by surprise to some extent is you look at some of the crazy things that AI says and does. Like one of the ones is last week it was unable to say, and it actually implied that Elon Musk's tweets are more harmful to the world than Adolf Hitler was. Mm-hmm. And that was the headline. And then you go and you read what actually happened, and it's a pretty fair characterization of what happened. But it seems like when you look at all those crazy things that these reporters were asking it and the crazy responses, it was trying to go out of its way not to offend anybody on any level. And it kept saying, well, your mileage may vary, is essentially what it kept saying. And it's like, well, no, I think most people would agree Hitler was evil and way worse than Elon Musk, I hope. So how do you deal with that sort of thing, and how does that wind up getting programmed? If you can explain, like, to take people's feelings into account, but then also not necessarily having like a concrete, oh, that was an easy one, that should have been easy, oh yeah, Hitler bad.
Right. Well, look. I mean, a lot of this technology is like a mirror, right? And it's a mirror that's held up to the corpus of data that it's trained on. And if it's trained to understand that this is the bias, right, that there's some sort of, however you want to describe it, point of view around, Elon Musk, then it's going to reflect that and amplify it. The information, not in every case, but in most cases, when the information, the text or video or whatever it is, it's ingested into the system, that's turned into a bunch of different mathematical models, and those mathematical models are then broken down, and then matches and comparisons are made to other mathematical models, which is how these patterns are recognized. So it has zero context. It has no idea what Adolf Hitler means. It has no idea what Elon Musk means. That means something to us, but not to the platform. And we keep forgetting that, like every time we sit down in front of it, because it feels like it has agency. It has no agency.
Okay, and I've been dying to ask you this question since last year when you said, because I asked you, because last year we were all worried that AI was a sentient being. That was like the news the week before we did this conference last year is that Skynet has gone live, AI is sentient, we're all going to die, right? And I asked you, and you said it's at least 15 years before it's going to be sentient. Mm-hmm. So I ask you again, this year, what's your prediction? Do we still have 15 years? Do we have 10? No. Is it 20?
It's 14.
14.
Yeah. But I think that's probably about right. The conversation I have, my son is just turned 16, and his friends will come over and say, Dad, when are the robots going to kill all of us? And I'm like, well, it's up to you. Because at Boeing, a bunch of guys didn't walk into a conference room and walk out with a 747, right? That took a long time to figure out, to get there. And even though technology grows exponentially and is adopted exponentially, to get to agency, to get to the complete reverse engineering of the human brain, to get to a place where you're going to be able to upload consciousness and do all of those kinds of things, there need to be significant technological innovations that currently don't exist in the world today.
Can you give us like a for instance, like just to get so we can, those of us who don't deal with this on a daily basis like you guys do, I mean, what would be like some of the advances that we need to see before we ever get anywhere near that?
The human brain interface, like we're seeing in many companies that are coming out now, the ability to connect the electrical activity in your brain to provide influence over information and context in these computing environments, and that needs to get to a level of precision so that we can understand better kind of what that architecture would be like in order to better approximate it and not just be a big morph engine.
Yeah. Go ahead, Creighton.
Yeah, you made a comment earlier that about networking different AI engines together and how the strength of that. And I know we often anthropomorphize AI, but there is some segment of that when it comes to training. And we're talking about like the Elon Musk question. You're asking a general purpose AI, those kinds of things, and it hasn't been trained on political science and history necessarily in the same way that a specifically trained model that has been trained on those types of things and is using other sources to figure things out. But if you can start to network different AIs that have different disparate understandings, that's when I think you can start to get some agency.
Yeah, and more texture anyway.
More texture, yeah. I think of like the attorney, if you can train an AI on case law, you can have one trained on contracts, but until you also have it connect with one who understands how to work with clients and commercial needs, the combination of those types of skills, whether that's in one AI model or that's a combination of AI models, I think can be is going to be a new realm.
And I think legislation is a part of it, right? I think that agency is slightly different than personhood. It's a lot different than personhood. But I think personhood may come first. And why would that be? And that would be because perhaps the entities, the business entities that create these models want to manage their liability, right? So if you have an entity, an intelligence entity that has personhood, well then where does that leave you, right? In terms of your liability. So I think I reckon something like that we'll probably see legislation looking towards that.
Yeah.
Malik, do you have any thoughts on that?
On superintelligence and
or
AGI.
Yeah, like where we're at and how long it's going to take to get to that place. I mean, because a lot of people seem to think it's there already.
No, we're not there for sure. We're not there. However, again, to me, that's not my biggest concern. Really, my biggest concern with AI is the immense power that certain, entities will get over the rest of us. That's the real threat to people, right? It's not a threat to the species from robots. It's really the threat that a very small minority will get total power and control over the rest of us. That's what I see as the biggest threat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, that's an amazingly important point, right? Because you have to remember, most of the world doesn't have reliable access to electricity, right, or clean water, and so you have to think the 1% or whatever we want to describe it has this computational power that can enhance intelligence and automate processes, and that leverage is not trivial.
So we also had.
There's a question.
Go ahead.
Just to follow up to that question, right? Because you talked a minute ago about quantum computing and the potential for quantum computing to really accelerate AI. Quantum computing is in very few hands. AI, large LLMs are in relatively few hands. Can you talk about over the next, that same 15 years, where is the control going to be for these systems, and how is that going to have consequences?
Let me go. So there's a lot of different flavors of quantum computing. Quantum annealing, cloud-based quantum annealing, which is a type of quantum computing that will help you solve problems if you turn these problems into the correct mathematical models, are things that you can use and deploy today. And I think that can be very, very helpful in trying to, for lack of a better term, kind of connect these black boxes together. So everyone having a quantum computer, the ability to manipulate qubits like in your basement, yeah, that's not going to happen, right? very, very, very soon. But the ability to leverage quantum annealing technologies is in my opinion, the near-term opportunity that will create massive advancements.
So I struggle with, AI can't, the generative AI struggles to give correct answers to some of the most basic questions, and at the same time we're talking about all these fears, and I think that sometimes. Well, let me give you what I have going on in my head, and I don't always understand how in my own head to put these thoughts together, because I do think there's a ton of reason to fear. But it's almost comical when it gets such simple, easy things wrong. But what's not comical, it seems to me, and I think one of the reasons why a lot of people think it's much further along, you read some of these transcripts that reporters will do and questions that they ask, and the AI seems to get aggravated. It seems to get upset sometimes. And just last week, there was somebody asked it a question about suicide, and the AI said something to the effect, well, go ahead, nobody's really going to miss you anyway, or something like that. I mean, it was just, it's comical in some ways. But I wonder whether that's because of the language model, that the AI it doesn't know how to express itself. And like, for example, the English language is one of the more complicated languages, and you could say the same thing and you put the inflection in a different place and it can mean something totally different. From being sincere and caring to being told wise-ass and sarcastic, saying the same exact thing. Is that, do you think, some of what we're seeing with some of these quote-unquote craziness about AI, is it just struggles with language?
I mean, language is a part of it. I talk about this a lot in the stuff I read a lot. Is the concept of intersubjectivity, a shared understanding of reality. These models do not have that, right? They have, again, they're morph engines trained on patterns. And suicide, being a human being is really hard. Right? It's really hard to be human. And cultural differences and language differences and high context communication and low context communication and just generally agreeing that we are here in this room having this conversation right now, it doesn't do that today, right? And so until we get there, I don't think it's a question of language and tuning the language. I think it's a question of creating intersubjectivity.
Malik, you have thoughts on that?
So I want to explain technically what these models are, right? So there's a foundation model layer. And at that layer, what the model is doing is only learning from patterns that it's been exposed to, language patterns. So you see, somebody ask a question, say, yeah, I'm thinking about this. And you see, it's been trained on seeing the other person conversing with it, saying, yes, do this, agreeing, right? So it's learning that behavior, and probably has seen that, in 70% of the cases they see the second person answering yes, do, and in 30% of the cases, no, think about this, right? So it has this tendency to agree, right, and say yes. Now, that's the foundation layer. And then on top of that, we have these fine-tuned or instruction-tuned models or applications like ChatGPT, the chatbots, where we add some instructions and some safety guardrails on top of the foundation model. The foundation model, in and of itself, all it does, it just predicts the next word in a conversation. And then on the second layer, that's where we're adding our rules, right? The safety guardrails, do not, generate content that inflicts harm, things like that, right? So it depends on the model that, you're citing, right? It may have been trained with certain safety rules. It may have not been trained with any safety rules. That's where the work comes in, right? Most of the work that we are doing, technologists are doing now, is around developing those guardrails on that layer, but not on the foundation. The foundational layer is dumb, just learns by seeing, text that we have generated on the internet.
But there's no way of knowing what it was trained on or how it was trained
Exactly,
today. And
yeah.
that's the challenge with the Hitler stuff.
Yeah. And
There's
go ahead.
questions in the back.
Is there a question?
Yeah, just thinking about the Coca-Cola example, and you had, it sounded like 3 different foundation models, maybe a GPT, so something for words, something for music, something for images, and then you fine-tuned those. And in fine-tuning it, I think I took it to mean that you're reducing the chance that the output will be something that would infringe on where you talked about, hey, we're doing it better for musicians because less chance that it'll have somebody else's licensed music or something like that.
That's correct.
But you're still dealing with a foundation model, to what Malik was saying, you're still dealing with a foundation model that may have been trained on unlicensed or inappropriately gathered material.
Absolutely. No question. We have no idea what it was. It could have been trained.
Can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, just how should we be thinking about it? Because there's the concern of, hey, I don't want you training on my stuff, but then really it's more like, I don't want your output to resemble my stuff.
Yeah, sure. And look, I am the furthest thing in the world from an attorney, right? So let me just make that clear. The reality is like if you think about it, the analog would be, let's say you're a musician, right? And you grew up listening to music your whole life, and then you write a song, right? But that song does not like any of the other songs you've ever heard. Like you publish it, and that becomes your own song. That's the analog. Right, so we ensured that it would not reproduce anything that had previously, been published or would infringe upon those rights, even though I guarantee it was trained on copy-protected information. Right, and so we then would, in certain cases where we were not with Coke necessarily, but with other clients maybe where there was severe concern or severe legal restrictions or whatever it is, then we would pre-generate a group of content and say, okay, we're only going to use within these things. So and so that's how we mitigate that also.
And I think this is where it also goes to use cases where you may have trained on things and content, but you don't have the output of it. But like in Elsevier's case, where we have scientific journals, we also don't want people training on the information within those materials, not just to not reproduce journal articles whole, but not to learn from our content. We don't want access to the library.
So let me ask you, how do they get it then? I mean, because we had this conversation that, people say that, it's almost impossible that an AI would output the verbatim copyright work from somebody, which is false. I mean, it happens all the time, right? That's your experience.
Right.
Your stuff is being output
You can ask for chapter 12 of this book, and it will reproduce it verbatim.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did it get it in the first place, right? Because if you don't want them to have it, it seems that they have not only a copyright problem on the input, like copying it, and they'll tell you they're not copying it, which it's another issue we'll deal with probably later on in the. But it seems like they had to have done something, either hacked into your system or got access legally to your system and then exceeded the authority that you gave them.
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of websites that have pirated copies of our content. Like scientific content, Sci-Hub, things like that were not authorized, but maybe it's hosted by a jurisdiction that doesn't care about copyright in the same way. And with the volumes of content and data that these models are being trained on, they're not going through them line by line. They're taking a package, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they're basically taking a package of content and training it wholesale. They're not doing a specific review for copyright protection.
So we're running out of time here, but I want to go down this path just a little bit here because, so is what Creighton said, is your understanding, guys, is that you just get access to a whole bunch of information and then train it?
Yeah, so there are companies that are crawling the internet to gather get these data sets, right, that they're selling then to Microsoft or Google or to OpenAI to train their models on. And in that crawling the internet, they're not checking whether this is copyrighted material or not. They're just gathering as much as they can.
So this is even more concerning to me, not from an IP perspective, but I mean, how do you know whether what you're training this is credible on any level? If you're just getting access to ones and zeros from anywhere, from some black market source.
And it goes back to the New York Times. What they're saying is it's a reputational issue as well, because the information is not. If you can't trust the information in the content, it's distinct from copyright. If you can't trust the information in the content, then you've got a problem.
Yeah. As a computer scientist, you can't.
Right, but that's why, like a reputable company like Coke comes to you and says, "Here, this is what we want you to do, and we only want you to use stuff not only from an IP perspective, but I would think so that they know that what's going into it is legit within whatever their definition of legit and accurate is for them."
Correct.
And then the output is going to be a higher quality output, right?
Correct.
All right, this has been fascinating. We could just keep going on, but we've hit an hour. But I want to give each of you an opportunity to have final thoughts. Creighton, how about we start with you? If there's one thing that people remember from this conversation, what do you hope that one thing is?
Start with use case. We have foundational models, we have general purpose models, and they have their own rules. But the use cases that we see as lawyers are going to be, most of the time, beyond that. And use cases, creating images, creating content, creating authentic content, creating creative content, and think about the specific use case.
Great, thanks a lot, Craig. Jason.
Transparency is really important with this stuff. And to Malik's point, I mean, you really can unwind it all the way down. But it's going to become impractical to do that very, very quickly. So going to have to determine, what is going to be an acceptable amount of risk inside of using these technologies, because you have to assume, to Gene's point, they're all bad.
Yeah, that's what I'm coming to understand here. Okay, and Malik, last but not least, the final word goes to you.
I don't know, stay up to date. I think this technology keeps evolving so quickly. What we say today may not be accurate tomorrow, so just stay up to date.
Mm-hmm. Good. What I'll say is at least none of you said your one final thought is you all need to be afraid you're going to die. So we got that going for us.
No, because they're listening.
Which is nice, right? Yeah, it's listening. All right, everybody. That was a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much.